Good afternoon. I am the Reverend Michael Crumpler, and I serve as the LGBTQ and Multicultural Programs Director at the Unitarian Universalist Association. And I'm also a coalition partner of the U.S. HIV and AIDS Faith Coalition. Let me begin with a pause and name that as we are gathered here, others are gathered elsewhere. Angry and just really beside ourselves with grief and frustration at just the sheer disregard for humanity of Dante Wright and George Floyd and even Lieutenant Nazario. And we just want to name what is very real and very present, and know that no program exists without people and without bodies. And so I just really am grateful for everyone gathered here and who showed up for this conversation amid what is happening in our country. Ashe. So the U.S. HIV and AIDS Faith Coalition includes people of faith, faith leaders, and people working in the HIV and AIDS response. Usually we gather for a one-day faith-free conference in advance of the U.S. Conference on HIV and AIDS to discuss and develop strategies to strengthen the capacity of houses of worship and faith-based organizations who are engaged or wish to engage in efforts to end HIV epidemic. But since the pandemic, we've been hosting a series of virtual events that we call HIV and Faith, strengthening the engagement of faith to end the epidemic. In this series, we explore the engagement of faith leaders and faith communities towards ending the HIV/AIDS epidemic. It features conversations addressing the intersections of race, class, gender, sex, sexuality, and religion in the HIV response, and offers insights, best practices, strategies, and vision for ending the epidemic. The event will center the voices of people with lived experience, commentary of faith actors from multiple faith traditions and practices, and HIV practitioners who have been engaged in the HIV and AIDS response. The U.S. HIV and AIDS Faith Coalition is an all-volunteer organization, and we welcome any gifts that will go directly towards the cost of hosting events such as this one. If you wish to donate, you may do so at the link that will be posted in the chat throughout the event. Your generosity is greatly appreciated. To learn more about the U.S. HIV and AIDS Faith Coalition, you can like us on Facebook at US HIV Faith, follow us on Twitter at US HIV Faith, subscribe to our YouTube channel, probably US HIV Faith, and contact us by email at hivfaithcoalition@gmail.com. I am honored to serve as moderator for today's epic HIV and Faith episode, engaging the impact of HIV and AIDS in trans non-binary communities. With us today are an amazing panelists and respondents. We have panelists Aaron L. Sabrut, J. Mace III, and M. Alsando, along with respondents Shyla K. Fields, the Reverend Dr. Willie Francois, and Ian Hill. I'll begin with a brief overview of HIV and faith and the trans community. Then I will introduce the panelists, who will then engage around the topics and issues at hand. Later in the program, we will hear from our respondents, who I will introduce first, before hearing their responses. if you will, to what they have heard from our panelists and what they are seeing in their spheres of influence. We will then take any questions from our audience via Facebook and or Zoom. But first, let me begin by naming that transgender non-binary experience is uniquely beautiful. Within and among the LGBTQ community, lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, and plus community deserves its own unique focus. Writer and progressive minister Reverend Chris Glacier writes, quote, "Though it is appropriate to link all LGBTQ experience because all of us endure discrimination and abuse for not fitting into society's gender expectations, the transgender experience may be lost in the complexities of the broader conversation," end quote. Unfortunately, the church, the mosque, the synagogue, and the people who oversee them have been the greatest source of and justification of violence and discrimination against the transgender community. Even as many cisgender gays and lesbians might experience some measure of privilege and acceptance in religious spaces, transgender and non-binary folks who do find their way into such spaces continue to face resistance and backlash for just wanting their pronouns respected or to pee without harassment. Not to mention full body autonomy and unconditional acceptance and embrace within the context of beloved community. It is for this reason that we need discussions like these to take place as often as possible. And our specially chosen panel is just the right collection of voices to speak to those issues. To give you a picture of how HIV impacts the transgender community, sharing a slide. A 2019 systematic review and meta-analysis found that an estimated 14% of transgender women are living with HIV. Breaking this down by ethnicity and race, 44% of those living with HIV were Black, African-American transgender women, 26% were Hispanic and Latina, and 7% identified as white. Among the 3 million HIV testing events that reported to the CDC in 2017, the percentage of transgender people who received a new HIV diagnosis was 3 times greater than the national average. Nearly 2/3 of transgender women and men surveyed by the Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance System in 2014 and 2015 reported never being tested for HIV. Transgender issues like transgender people are diverse, complex, and evolving. And as I've already mentioned, the transgender experience is distinct from the lesbian, gay, bisexual experience. That's because transgender issues have to do with gender identity rather than sexual orientation, which is a lot more visible than being gay or lesbian or bisexual, making them easier targets. But what's even more special about transgender people is their self-understanding and self-expression when it comes to gender. How they understand themselves juxtaposed to the accepted norms of what is masculine or what is feminine, or even what is socially acceptable as transgender. According to the transgender theologian Justin Tanis, quote, "This is a spiritual issue because it is the way in which we physically embody the spiritual truths within us. That we reflect outwardly that which is inwardly true for us is a matter of integrity. The Spirit calls us away from self-hatred into an appreciation of the wonderful creation that we are," end quote. Given the lack of understanding of trans issues, transgender people often feel ostracized, even within the LGBTQ community. Discrimination, unemployment, homelessness, inadequate healthcare, depression, and high-risk behaviors are experienced disproportionately by the trans population. These same risk factors exacerbate HIV and AIDS transmission in the general population. Thus, In a community that is so often defined by these sobering realities, the outcomes are even more stark. According to Presbyterian minister and trans woman, the Reverend Erin Swanson, perhaps the most common emotional companion to gender identity differences is shame. Attempts to deal with shame lead to many other problems like substance abuse or severe depression, and shame interferes with avenues of treatment, end quote. In other words, when we are ashamed, we are inhibited from seeking the care that we need and often know that we deserve. Shame renders one impotent in our efforts to access the power and strength to access the care that we need in all realms of well-being, whether it's housing, employment, spiritual community, and for the purposes of our discussion today, HIV and AIDS. Simple accommodations such as the use of non-gender language, equitable access to gender-neutral bathrooms, naming transgender concerns in prayers and sermons are important ways of expressing welcome to transgender persons. The pastoral needs of transgender congregants might involve any of these issues, but among their first concerns may be whether they feel at home in your faith community. Now, enough from me. Now we'll welcome our amazing panel to say more about any of what I have said and anything else they wish to tell us about HIV, faith, the impact of HIV, AIDS in the transgender community, and in the work that they do. Among our panel is Aaron L. Sabrut. Aaron L. Sabrut, whose pronouns are he, him, and his, is a transgender Egyptian American lawyer, writer, and artist living on the unceded St. Aminus territory. He believes in planting seeds for collective liberation through action, relationship, policy, and literal seeds. Aaron is the advocacy manager and Black and Pink, an open family of 20,000 currently and formerly incarcerated LGBTQIA and HIV positive folks and their outside allies. My cat is like all over the place as I give this presentation. Clyde is showing off, who does not let me touch him ever, except just shows off when I'm on Zoom. So I just want to name that is happening. Cats over program. Back to Aaron. He is just showing out over here. He reached the cat, not Aaron, but Aaron is showing out as well. He researches prison abolition and law, working to make the law a tool for abolitionists and incarcerated folks. In his free time, he can usually be found writing or puttering around his garden. We also have Jay Mace III. Jay Mace is a Black trans poet and educator based in Seattle. He is co-editor of the Black Trans Prayer Book, which can be found at theblacktransprayerbook.org. Jay Mace comes from a Christian and Muslim upbringing and has worked with community members all over the US, UK, and Canada on the needs of LGBTQIA youth and adults in secular and faith spaces. His musings and work have been featured on MSNBC, Believe Out Loud, NBC Out, among others. He is the founder of Awkward, the first ever trans and queer people of color specific talent agency. And finally, we have M. M is a 59-year-old Afro-Latina and a lifelong New Yorker. She identifies as a queer trans woman and transitioned at the age of 48. M is and has been a hair and makeup artist for film and television since the early 80s. M spends most of her free time taking care of her 84-year-old mother and staying connected with her trans sisters and daughters. M is also very connected in the 12-step recovery community and other mind, body, and spirit practices. In her spare time, she enjoys watching films, multiple TV shows, and group texting me and others with her very large extended family and friends in the community here. So welcome, Aaron, and then Jay Mace, and then M. Tell us a little bit about who you are.
Hi, folks. Thank you for that introduction, Mike. That was really wonderful. As Mike said, I'm Erin. I use he and him pronouns. I'm on unceded Seminus territory, colonially known as British Columbia, Canada. Yeah, I'm really grateful to be here, and I'm really excited for this conversation. I think that as a person, I really don't live a lot into being a person of faith. I think that in general, as someone who grew up Muslim in Egypt, which is supposed to have been a secular Muslim society, a lot of my experiences of faith have been really traumatic. And so I think that that's something that I've really tried to distance myself from. I'm really grateful that these kinds of conversations are starting to happen and that people are able to openly speak about how it is that faith is involved in producing gender socially and making it so that trans people don't have space to be ourselves, and how we can change that and create a space where faith, as you so beautifully quoted, I believe, Mike, is something that encourages people to live their spiritual truth through practice of faith and through practice of their own gender identity. So yeah, just to speak a bit more about my work, I do legal advocacy for incarcerated folks. And one of the things that we've been recognizing a lot around HIV is that a lot of people are criminalized for experiencing HIV or for activities that increase their risk factors for HIV, such as engaging in sex work, you know, like, and I think faith plays a role in that. When I was young, the idea that I should conform to a certain gender identity was hand in hand with the idea that I should perform my sexuality in a certain way, you know, that people should wait to be married, that people should be in heterosexual relationships, that people should have children, is all part of how we experience being gendered, being told as children that we are men and women, often by our faith communities or by our families. And I think that opening up the conversation to say, you know, people should be free to act on their own inherent gender identity and sexuality is really important to improve our health outcomes in every way, you know, for HIV as well as for different factors, you know, addiction, mental health, really anything. Yeah, I think I'll cede the floor for now, but just excited to enter into the conversation.
If we're going in order, I guess I'll go next. So good afternoon / good morning, everybody. So as Michael said, my name is Jay Mace. I use he, him as pronouns, and I'm currently based in Seattle. The thing that comes up for me first, as we kind of talk about this particular topic today, is I want to kind of name an ancestor, Charlene Arcilla, who was a Black trans woman who was an HIV and AIDS activist. She was the founder of the Philadelphia Trans Health Conference, which I still believe is the #1, the largest trans conference that happens in North America, as well as she was a minister at the Philadelphia Unity Fellowship Church, which I attended back when I was still living in Philly. So she was the first other trans person that I saw doing faith work, and was someone who really shaped the ways that I saw my capacity in faith spaces. Similar to what I was hearing you say, Erin, about like trauma within the faith community stuff. I had a lot of trauma growing up within faith spaces. And I was able to come back into faith spaces as an adult, not necessarily because I'm invested in the survival of religious institutions, but because I'm invested in the spirit of especially Black trans people and our rights to understanding our divinity, our rights to life, our rights to access to care. And so I try to spend a lot of my work dealing with people and their spiritual trauma and talking to people about, you have a right to let go of your spiritual trauma, and faith institutions and religious institutions need to be held accountable for what they do to us and the ways that they put us in political spaces that causes harm, in housing spaces that causes harm, and put us into more likelihoods of domestic violence, sexual assaults, all those different things. Those things don't come from just the secular world. Those things come from the ability of people to dehumanize us, and people get to, they learn so many ways to dehumanize folks through religion and through theologies that are unanalyzed, that are invested in violence without a deconstruction of what that violence, how that violence actually causes harm to people, or what we actually do with survivors of that violence.
Ashe. You're on.
Oh, okay. I was just, my mind was in what was shared. So, hi, everybody. My name is Emma Sando, and I am grateful to be here. Thank you for inviting me, Michael. I'm really touched by what the both of you have shared. I do have religious trauma. I grew up with that, but I pretty much shut it down when I was able to in my teens. You know, and I respect the religion that my family chooses, my trans family chooses. And I'm still in a place of spirituality. My faith comes from the experiences that I live and believing in, I'm going to be okay. When I first came, when I was young and around people in the 80s that were getting sick and aging right before my eyes and dying, it was very traumatic, and I lost a lot of dear friends, a lot of female friends in my life. And we do recover. We do find ways of finding families and coming to some kind of belief in our circle. And I don't go to religious establishments. And taking care of my mom, she's uber religious. She is a Hispanic. She's a Hispanic Jewish woman. And so I'm in the process and have been in the process of respecting where she is at and being compassionate and understanding and respectful. Since the pandemic, my mom watches a lot of religious programs, and she's asked me to sit with her, and then she explains to me. She speaks of the Bible, and I just listen and respect her journey, and I feel blessed and honored and grateful that I get to share in this with my mom, and I have my trans family, and Michael, and so many other people to walk me through this, and some of my siblings. So I've been involved with HIV for over 30 years, 34 years to be exact. And, and I still work with people who zero convert these days. And I'm very supportive, and I guide them, and I go with them to appointments, and I'm there for their diagnosis. And it's a beautiful thing. I feel really blessed to be a part of this journey. So thank you.
Thank you, Em and Aaron and Jay Mace. You all bring such different textures to the conversation, and I'm gonna allow you to speak, if you will. The grounding questions that that we can just basically have a conversation is, which I think you've done. Tell us a little bit more about who you are, where you live, and the work that you do, which you all have shared as introductory. But and then you've also described your faith. But what role has and does HIV and AIDS play in your life and work? And what do you feel faith communities have done to harm or help trans people living with HIV? Go.
Like, do we all just want to kind of like just jump at it whenever?
Yeah,
Like,
just
whenever we
just
kind of
popcorn. You can all you can each unmute as well and just talk to one another.
Yeah, I mean, I think to reflect on what Em was just sharing, especially about being able to be present with people. I think so. Doing for me myself, as far as doing work, I used to work in social services. So part of my work was with an organization that did a lot of work, particularly with folks who were positive. Also, again, having colleagues and theologians and friends that helped create the world I live in, you know. So also thinking about from folks that housed me when I had no place to live, or like people that you know, and especially people that helped to form the kind of activism that exists right now. I think of people like Octavia Lewis over in New York. I think of people like even Louis Ortiz, who doesn't identify as trans, but who is a person who gathers and has gathered for me a lot of like other trans and cis folks around HIV and AIDS in the larger Black and Brown activism community through Grand Verones. You know, and so to me, what I think faith communities have not done around trans folks.
I said done or
trans
have
folks
not
who are
done,
HIV
helped or
positive.
harmed.
Yeah, so just in that way, especially, is not taking into account the ways that many LGBT rights, especially cisgender LGBT rights, have been argued from the framework of we deserve rights because we're not as bad as trans people, right? So like that's actually a lot of how the legal things that have passed in this country have existed. Is when I think about especially the first organizations in the U.S. like that were recognized as LGBT little t organizations like the Medellin Society, or Daughters of Bilitis. You know, a lot of the things that they created were trans exclusive, and that you couldn't be a part of them if you were a trans person because you were seen as perverse. Like so I think about larger institutions that faith communities put in a lot of their money or time into, like the Human Rights Campaign, right? Or GLSEN or GLAAD, or like all these national organizations who may have some trans representation and might be able to pull the wool over your head that way, but largely do not have trans people as part of their foundational boards or their frameworks or the people that they'll actually give the dollars to. So I see a lot of faith institutions who want us to be grateful that they said our name right once or said our pronouns right once, but largely do not care about our survival because they don't trust us, right? Seeing Charlene, as I mentioned, Charlene, she was the first Black trans person that I saw given trust within a faith institution, you know? You know, and I've been out for a long time before that, you know?
Thank you. One more question for you is, I mentioned in your intro the Black Trans Prayer Book. Can you say a little bit about that and the purpose behind that and how that engages faith and inspiration and, you know, the canon of scripture?
And so in that way, so the Black Trans Prayer Book is a collection. Actually, I have it with me because there was a couple pieces that stood out to me for today. But so this is a collection of 20 different Black trans folks from all over the US and beyond. And so I'm co-editor of that with my colleague, Lady Dame Figueroa Didi. And so it's for people, all different faith traditions, as well as people who feel completely abandoned by faith traditions and people that just want to deal with their own spiritual trauma. In particular, today, the person that stood out to me the most was Whit Lopez, who talks a lot about the ways that churches not just deal with trans people, but transness and illness and transness for folks across all different types of identities of sickness. And so they have this piece in here that's just like a meditation for folks, especially for Black trans folks who also identify as sick and or disabled, and says, I'm not broken, I'm not damaged, I'm not a burden, I'm not a curse, I'm not the result of divine punishment, and I'm not the remnants of my ancestors' shortcomings. I'm not the product of my faithlessness. I'm here and I'm worthy, right? And so that may be simple to a lot of people, but the message many people get from faith institutions is that their status is about the morality, right? And so sometimes traditions, and I largely hear religious institutions not be able to actually have theologies that remove this morality from the ways that we may have might be HIV positive, from the ways that we might be disabled, from the ways that we might be have any kind of ailment.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you so much. And the Black Trans Prayer Book is I use it as a resource in my work as a cis faith leader doing outreach in queer spaces, and as a personal source of renewal and revival for myself. So thank you. Aaron, you are from Black and Pink, right? Which does a lot of work with folks who are incarcerated and HIV positive, and yet you come out of a particular faith, space, world, generation, all the things. Yeah, tell us a little bit more about how your faith experience impacts your work or doesn't, and how your work informed your faith.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think just reflecting on Jay Mace's response to you asking, like, what has faith done or not done for trans people? Like, I also was just struck by how enormous of a question that is, because it literally starts from the very beginning, like people's entire lives in faith communities are defined by how they're supposed to act. I mean, again, I grew up Muslim, so it was literally like, I grew up in faith spaces that were physically segregated on the basis of gender. Like talking about like, I wasn't even supposed to go in the same part of the mosque, which is to say the actual mosque as cis men, like the women and those of us who were designated as such, had to go to a closet in the back, usually one that wasn't heated or very large. And so religious traditions instill in people from a very, very young age what their gender identity is supposed to be. And they also teach people that gender deviance is wrong. And that's been part of the history of Christianity in particular, as well as Islam, because we Muslims love to learn from Christians, just like Christian people like to steal ideas from Jewish people, that the colonial expansion of these religions is directly tied to gender conformity and imposing gender conformity, whether it's during the witch trials in Europe or in North America, or during residential schools or the settlement of North America, as well as the way that enslaved people were gendered and forced to engage in sexuality. All of that is about teaching people in the context of religion and in the context of becoming part of civilization to be cisgender, to be heterosexual. And so when that's so ingrained in our faith communities, of course, people have to go under the radar and do things that they otherwise wouldn't to survive. Of course, people have to trade sex work. Of course, people have to sell or use drugs because they're not able to access competent mental health care or advice. And, our religious institutions are also involved in stigmatizing those behaviors, which people participate in for their own survival. When we live in a culture where religious institutions continue to stigmatize casual sex, let alone sex work, that again contributes to this general culture that sex work is wrong. Religion imposes our cultural morality. We like to think that we live in secular societies, but a lot of our law is still based on religion. And so the things that spiritual communities tell people as truth become encoded in our laws, whether they admit that or not. And whether, we know that whenever there is law debated about LGBT issues, religious communities are showing up to the table to talk about them because they feel that they have a stake and they feel that they're participating. And we should recognize that too, and recognize that what has gone on is also part of that. And, the ongoing criminalization of people who are trans, people who have HIV, and then now people who engage in behaviors that increase their likelihood of getting HIV, and also are, because they're trans, such as sex work, end up becoming incarcerated. And then while incarcerated, they are even more likely to be exposed to HIV, and they're even more likely to be exposed to discrimination. And so it just becomes a cycle that, I feel that I'm like living in the middle of in speaking to folks who are incarcerated on a daily basis. who are living with those realities and understanding like how far back the layers that led to this person sending me a letter saying like, I'm in such and such a situation while I'm in prison. You know, the reason that that happened to them as a trans person, often a Black person or another person of color who's incarcerated, is because of the spiritual and cultural context of their childhood. And so faith institutions are creating the culture that we all grow up in and we have to navigate in. And I think that's a big responsibility that needs to be shouldered.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much for that. Em, you've obviously heard, I see you, I know you, and I see you, and I see you like about to get happy up
Well,
in your,
yeah, I
like,
mean,
Chelsea apartment. Go ahead.
My thought in all of this is, you know, I was born in the 60s, and I didn't recognize religion until I was about 5. And, when, at this point, there was that's when the trauma started happening in my personal life. And, navigating that as a 5-year-old was difficult. And, my parents put us in Catholic school. And I remember the aggression that these nuns and priests were given. And I've been an effeminate child since birth. And my mom still talks about me being colic, and she could breastfeed me, and just, childhood, her memories and her experience of me and the rest of my siblings as children. And, I had to, fight off these priests, and I had to, defend myself from these nuns who were very punishing people. And, and that's, that's not, that was not a safe space. That did not make sense, because my parents hadn't even put their hands on me at this point. And these people in these religious schools and establishments, are punishing. And so I was, thankfully my parents took me out, because I was, very stubborn. And, and I cried every time they took me. And I was like, they're hitting me, they're screaming and yelling at me, they're calling me stupid. And that's not how you raise somebody else's child or assist in the education of another person's child. And yeah, I mean, go back to when religious first started. I mean, it was mostly men spoke of this idea of God, and and the stuff that Jesus Christ went through, and they still have this image of him being crucified. And I am, I had a discussion with my mom about that. I'm like, why don't they just take him off the crucifix? Why do we have to still live with this image of him? And then she was like, well, he sacrificed. I said, that wasn't a sacrifice, Mom. That was, somebody who was forced to do that, who was tortured to do that. And, that wasn't his choice, or their choice. And and, so the stories that we're being told, and, our children are being told, and all of us in general are being told stories that we weren't there for, and these books, these have been written by who knows who. I don't know who John is. I don't know who Mary is. It's like, it's a lot for me to take on, and then be punished for who I am and my truth. And it's not it's a struggle for me. I'm in a 12-step program, and there's a lot of mention of God, this spirit, this invisible, spirit who grants power to cis white men, who it's just so much. It's a story that could be told differently, instead of a punishing way, but that's not how it's being done. And we, as human beings, it seems that we torture each other. We cross boundaries. And it's not just we, the LGBTQ, it's them, how they treat each other, how men marry women, and, you stay home, you cook, you clean, you take, you bear children, you take care of the children and me, and I will be the man. And I'm still confused by the roles that we are told to play, and how we should play house and how we should be in relationships. It doesn't make any sense to me to be told by this mythical creature, in my opinion, how we should be and act. And it's really no different from the beginning of time. Men are still fighting, races. There's so many races that created war over stupidity, and I'm just tired of it, as I've been afraid all my life because of the color of my skin. My father, he changed his name because he didn't want a slave name. And he didn't know how to communicate with his own children because of his choices and his stresses and depressions or whatever he suffered, which he could not express or show. It's just, it's sad, but we survive ourselves. And that's the gift in all this, that we learn in spite of all that has gone on and that is still going on. We find our voices, we find our truths, we live in our truths to the best of our abilities, and we help each other. Those of us who are capable and willing to help each other and love each other. Some people throw the word love around as if it's a frisbee. And when I care, I really care. And I'm not caring for somebody for, sexual reasons. I just want to be a human being that respects, that's learning to respect others and learning to accept that back from others. But it's not so easy because, we're born to be insecure and torn apart, no matter what the circumstances are. I have molestation in my childhood, and, I had to learn how to forgive those in order for me not to wind up with the consequences and circumstances. Although I had to learn how to navigate my way out of that. And if, getting sick, I developed asthma after birth, and, doctors had to learn how to care for, a sick child with asthma. And thank you for the 1 minute warning. But, the AIDS pandemic has not been treated with like this pandemic. It wasn't treated like even 9/11 was treated differently because of the circumstances. And LGBTQ people are going to be treated this way until others open their hearts and become more accepting and stop living in denial and shame, treating people with shame and their own shame and fear. So it's a lot. Religion and how we treat each other is very complex.
Well, thank you, each of you. I could hear you all share, prophesy for all afternoon. I really, really do appreciate you for just sharing your truth, sharing where each of you come from, very vast places. But I believe what I'm hearing is that the core is the same: human dignity, decency, and this is about HIV and faith, and that's what you're speaking about as we speak about human dignity, decency, and faith, and the role that faith institutions play. And with that, I want to bring in our respondents who are prophets in their own right, and who have power, and who are gatekeepers, and have been entrusted and called. And let me get my script back. Yeah, so we will, as I mentioned earlier, I'll introduce you as well, and then bring you into the conversation, and we're just all gonna, but ultimately I want to hear what you heard, and what we all heard, really, and how your spheres of influence can respond or are responding to the lived experience of M and Aaron and J Mace and their work. We have Ian Hill. Ian, pronounced Ian, I-A-N. Hill is an Air Force veteran, spoken word artist, social justice activist, and aspiring military chaplain. They graduated from Starr King School of Ministry in spring of 2020 and is currently serving in a ministerial intern at First Unitarian and UU Fellowship, Ottawa in Canada. Ian is originally from Miami, and also considers Oakland their home after living there for nearly 20 years. We also have Shyla K. Fields, a native of Birmingham, Alabama, who currently serves as program manager for the Office of Identity, Inclusion, and Collective Conscious at the University of Alabama Medicine. Previously, she served as the HIV district manager of Jefferson County and the linkage and retention coordinator for the 1917 clinic of UAB. She is a devoted wife, mother, advocate, and community activist. And finally, we have the Reverend Dr. Willie D. Francois III, who's senior pastor of Mount Zion Baptist Church in Pleasantville, New Jersey, my home state. In 2017, Francois was indicted into the Martin Luther King Jr. Board of Preachers at Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia. Dr. Francois currently serves as the president of the Black Church Center for Justice and Equity, where they are dedicated to reaffirming the social justice tradition of the Black church and amplifying the Black church's role in the lives of the American public by providing a platform for progressive theology, inquiry, public policy analysis, public engagement. Welcome, you all. And I welcome you to also introduce yourselves and then begin responding to what you heard. Go.
I think we're going in the order that you just said, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Well, just first, thank you so much for having me here. As it's been said, my name is Ian Hill, and I am a Unitarian Universalist, almost minister at First U Ottawa in Canada, as was said. I identify as queer and non-binary. I use all of the pronouns, he, she, they, all of them, long as they're spoken with love. And that's all I can think to introduce myself, because I do want to just get into responding to the things that I heard. And it was so much. And first, I want to just give thanks for M. I recognize M as a queer elder, and I, in my life, have very rarely had the opportunity to engage with queer elders, which just says it says something. And so, just hearing so much of the things that you said, it just was so significant to me, and I just want to thank you for sharing so vulnerably and deeply, and being willing to have your age all included in it. It's just beautiful, and I really, I'm serious. I love it. I really, really do.
I'm laughing because I know M, and it just brings me joy. That was just like a bubble that came up when you said that. So
I'm really trying to get scooped up under the wing of M is what I'm trying to do. So I'm just gonna put that out there. Because I need that. I need that in my life.
We'll be in touch. We'll be in touch.
Yes. I need it in my life, and the reason why I need it is because of just some of the things that were shared, particularly around religious-based trauma. I am in Unitarian Universalism directly because of how I experienced my childhood religion as Christian in this Baptist community. And gosh, I know everyone on Aaron, J. Mace, and M all named elements of religious trauma. So just kind of piggybacking on all of that, most particularly the limitations based, and I think Aaron was the one who mentioned that, the limitations based on being placed in the girl or boy kind of category, and then woman, man to when you want to go into your worship space. And although in my Christian church, I didn't at the time identify as non-binary, it was the model that told me that I was supposed to be a good Christian woman. And in order for me to be a good Christian woman, I felt like, well, I need to learn how to like men, because I already knew that wasn't the thing. And what it led to was a whole lot of promiscuity, which, goes against some other things in the Bible. But I'm like, I just got to be straight. And so if I could just be straight, then God gonna forgive me for all of this other, I can't even remember the name of it for when you're not fornication. Like that's gonna be the day. God gonna forgive me for that, because I'm doing it in the name of Jesus is what I was saying. Because I wanted to be this good Christian woman. And just to tie into that, a lot of this sexual activity was done unprotected, because there was no people didn't talk about HIV and AIDS. At least I didn't hear it in Miami. People weren't talking about it at all. And so I look back and I just think about how much I was risking and allowing myself to be open to, again, from this mindset of thinking that I'm doing this to be a certain kind of woman that I thought would be most pleasing to God. And that energy then led me to go into the military to further try to repress my identity, which then by this point now I've internalized this shame, which Reverend Michael mentioned earlier. And in that shame, I just wanted to hide all of myself and stuff my real self just so deep inside that when someone first told me about what it meant to be trans, my first thought was Black people aren't trans. So that couldn't have been me all of this time, because that's not a thing. That's white people are trans. I mean, it's a lie, but that was how I was raised thinking. But when it was introduced in my adult life, and I really thought about it and really thought about how for my whole life I have wanted to be like the men or the boys that I was dating and sleeping with. I wanted to be them, and all of that. And so I was so grateful that I had the opportunity to start taking testosterone, doing all the things to have this just beautiful masculine presenting identity that I have now. But it was hidden. It had to be hidden because when Jay Mace mentioned the small t in the LGB, the military then opened to allow for LGB. And here I am secretly small t, hiding this and doing all of this stuff, which then has more and more shame, because if I'm hiding something, then clearly there's something wrong with it. I'm still, I'm risking, I could get, at this time I was in the military for almost 15 years and I could be kicked out because of this. I just realized right now we were doing some of the introduction and I wasn't sure if I should be doing all of this talking right now. I don't remember how long I had.
You
so
can do all the talking you want whenever. And I love the response. You're responding in the appropriate way to clarify that. And we also want to hear how it informs your calling. And you're an intern at Unitarian Universalists, 2 Unitarian Universalist congregations in Ottawa, Canada. And Unitarian Universalism is a faith that is publicly accepting, that ordains transgender ministers and musicians and administrators and religious educators, and yet we don't respond well at all. And that's the work that we all have engaged in together. So that too can be kind of cherried on top of all the like beauty that you're sharing.
Yes. So. Well, in that vein, I do want to say that a part of my reason for choosing to be a UU minister, my first questions was, how they feel about kink? Because I was afraid there might be some photos floating out there somewhere in the world that could come up. And I was like, are they going to excommunicate? Are they going to kick me out? Are they going to take my stole if they find these pictures? And so I heard that UU had a whole kink.
Now y'all know why I work here.
And then I was like, and then I was also, I was married at the time and I identified as poly, and I was like, how do they feel about that? Like, are they going to kick me out? Am I going to lose? And when I heard that UU also had a poly crew, so they was all for trans, all for queer folks, I was like, this is a liberating faith. I was so happy to find this denomination. And yet, as Reverend Michael just said, we're not doing enough. I had to do research to find out what UU has done in relation to HIV and AIDS, which means I haven't been hearing about it. No one talks about it. I didn't know nothing about any of that. And when I look back at stuff and saw that we've been saying we about making changes since 1986 and again in 2003, but it's 2021 now. I don't hear nobody talking about it other than Reverend Michael. He was the last person who I saw who wrote an article about it. So even though I'm in this liberating faith, who claims we want to do a lot, wrote a whole what is called a resolution. We passed some resolutions about what we're gonna do as a faith, and I don't see it. So
resolutions, honey.
Yeah. So I'll say all of that and leave it there.
Where change dies when the resolution is passed. Thank you, Ian, so much.
Yeah.
Shyla, so grateful to have you straddling both. Is it Auburn and Alabama? I mean, how do you stay in your work in the past?
Well, I didn't go to Auburn or Alabama. I just live in Alabama.
Okay.
So I went to a HBCU. We can work wherever. Okay. That's right. Excellent. I went to a HBCU. Very proud, still in Tuscaloosa. And I identify as a cisgender woman who is a Christian, but is always blessed in being put in these types of spaces. So many fantastic things that I've heard. And I believe that my space as far as believing in Christ has pulled me in the space of where I work. I've always wanted them to match, and I'm just grateful that I've been able to be in this space on a regular basis. And it's always been in a place of furthering education being mine. And Jay Mass said a beautiful thing is just holding spaces, particularly in religion, holding them accountable for their trauma. I think that anything that you do, including holding people accountable, it can be done in love. But education is key. And I'm just so always overwhelmingly grateful that this space is a space where you can be gently called out to be called in. And so my job is just to sit here and listen and to affirm. I do not know it all. I am grateful to have worked 9 years within the HIV and AIDS realm, where I have sat like M and given diagnosis and been able to see miracles and wonders from people who have on their deathbed to come back, and I don't even realize who they are. And also be humbled by people being able to just educate me and letting me be quiet. So I'm okay with being quiet. You might see me just doing this a whole bunch, but I'm taking notes. Um, um, and you said that you were like, Black people aren't trans. Um, as, in my life and experience, it's a whole bunch of thought and current thought and past thought about what Black people aren't. Black people aren't supposed to have mental health care. Black people aren't supposed to be leaders. Black people aren't supposed to nowadays live just in peace and in harmony with one another. And so just to see this beautiful array of Black and brown leaders and innovators and warriors and reverends and whatever denomination or whatever space that you hold in, it speaks truth to power that we are more than what our skin tone says we are. So thank you, Aaron, Jay, and Ian, and Em, for showing your truths. The one thing that I know that I would take away is, if nothing else, transferring into my new position of identity, inclusion, and collective conscious, which my director was very, very intentional about naming it that. You would know it as diversity, equity, and inclusion. But usually when people hear that, they're like, oh yeah, we need to include Black people. Got it. And some other people, got it. But we wanted to be very, very intentional about why it was called identity, inclusion, and collective conscious. Will be in, in any space, particularly in healthcare space, it is important to allow people to speak their truths and identify exactly the way that they are. And that way you are afforded a new story. You are afforded their truth and how to take care of them as a whole person, not as a check of the box, not as what you think their symptoms are before you read in their notes, but allowing people to identify before you speak is the most inclusive way to really, really hold high to healthcare. And our goal within our office is to have a collective conscience of that mind, of that if we do the steps on a daily basis to work on ourselves first, because a lot of times we're thinking, oh no, we need to deal with you, but really we need to deal with ourselves, right? We need to understand the traumas that we may put about. We need to be called out sometimes to know that the thing that I'm saying hurts you. The thing that I am thinking creates bias. And most importantly, it does not get you to your perspective in healthcare. And that's why we have so many disparities within the Black and brown community. So I thank you, Em. I will always hold that we are survivors of ourselves, but we cannot survive ourselves if we don't, one, appreciate that we have to know more. We have to do better and just take account of being empathetic with everybody's journeys in order for us to be better.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. And the Reverend Dr. Willie Francois.
Thank you for gathering this space and how this has been held so sacredly as so much truth has been shared. I think that these spaces tend to be more spiritual, more sacred than the spaces where we often hold worship. And even to be able to feel that and to name that in a virtual setting just speaks to the kind of abundant humanity that is missing from so many faith communities, the kind of abundant humanity that is missing from our own journeys and search for God. And so there's something deeply divine that was shared here today that I don't think you can really overstate. So, I heard a lot today. I heard so much that was faith feeding for me today. But I think where I landed listening to these very clear stories around religious trauma, these clear stories around spiritual injury, it reminded me that as a pastor, no matter how much of an ally I call myself, an accomplice I call myself, I'm really still a custodian of these trauma-inducing spaces? And like, how do I, and it raises the questions of like, how do you really show up for like this pan-justice work when at the end of the day, you have to tell yourself that you are a custodian of a trauma-inducing space, trauma around class, trauma around gender performance, gender identity, trauma around sexuality. Is like, that is really a part of the history of like hegemonic Christianity, that it is as much as those of us who lead these spaces, that we got to be honest that we are leading spaces that have historically and sometimes currently do injury, do trauma, do the kind of trauma work that actually doesn't just result in exclusion, but I think we kind of let ourselves out the hook when we say the kind of gospel, the kind of preaching that we do just locks people out, and not really take into account how the actual gospel that we preach actually does death, right? That there's a body count that churches have to own because of the ways that we've defined what it means to be human, and the ways we've defined what it means to be accepted. And like, sitting with that has been, it pushes the work a little bit for me. One, because it exposed the way for me, just listening to how M was talking, it exposes the way for me, the way churches sort of engender male cis hetero fragilities, right? We sort of act as if we act as if these are strengths, but really the kind of exclusionary politics that we play are really connected to the fragilities that we hold, the kind of uncomfortableness in our own skins, the kind of unsettledness in our own lives. And I think that's one of the greatest tragedies of organized religion, is that it actually does offer a mask for these deep insecurities that we're never engaged, we're never called to engage, right? So like, listening helped me to think about the kind of fragilities that exist within me, of course, but the fragilities that exist in front of me, that are connected to privilege and power, but is more so a manifestation of these sort of male cis hetero insecurities and fragilities that we sacralize as something other than what they really are. It also got me thinking about like toxic allyship. So we had a trans sister who was a member of our church. She was a clergy person in our church for a very short amount of time. And I thought that as an ally, it was my goal to integrate, her into our congregation, when honestly, I was actually facilitating the violence, right? As an ally, I probably should have been more clear, like, an exit is probably what's most healthy. Like, there are some cases, so thinking about this, there are some cases when being a part of faith community, and I think like Aaron helped me with this, like sometimes being a part of faith community is really not the answer for being a person of faith, right? And as an ally, in what sense was I being toxic by sharing these narratives? Oh, we're inclusive, sharing these narratives. Oh, I'm a queer affirming pastor, I'm a trans affirming pastor. But really, as an ally, I should have been helping to walk out.
You don't want to come to my church.
Because the staying in, right. Or the kind of referral, like no, you need to be with Ian, not with me. Because I don't, and it's like, as an ally who's a leader of a church, to tell yourself that you actually don't represent the culture of this house, right? And that's kind of painful. Like, as somebody who's used to being in power, as somebody who's used to yes, interrogating, but also benefiting from male privilege, like, to get to the place where you have to acknowledge the fact that I can't keep you safe. And honestly, maybe that's not the job that I should be even undertaking, because I know I can't keep you safe. So the idea of toxic allyship came up as I was listening, particularly listening to Aaron. And the last thing I would want to say is, and maybe it was M that gave me this, but There has to be, like, and this is not particularly about trans life and trans exclusionary practices in church, but it's really about like how damaging and how violent some of the major symbols of Christianity just inherently are, right? The idea of the cross. I think like we have to do some maintenance. We have to do some upgrading and some reimagination around the cross, because the idea, and it was the idea of voluntary or involuntary death as something that satisfies God's need to kill or God's need to harm is really sadistic and masochistic in some very toxic ways. And so I think that part of what is wrong, part of what is off in so much of Christianity is that we center suffering, we center the death of innocence. We center the death of the few as a way of benefiting the masses and benefiting the whole in some way. And so it just raises the question, at what point do we really have to do an upgrading of our theological assumptions? Because some of the things that we are spreading as the tenets of the faith may actually be doing the kind of implicit harms that we say we want to guard against, right? That to say that death is really the agenda of a religion. Of course, we don't care when trans folk die, because of course folk have to die in order for us to live. Of course, we don't care that Dante Wright or George Floyd die in the same state, really, as a Christian nation, because we have a religion that celebrates the tool of empire. Like the cross is not a tool of God. The cross is a tool of empire. It is an electric chair. It is a lethal injection. It is a stretcher. It is a noose around the neck. And like we celebrate the images of empire. So of course we don't care if folk die of HIV and AIDS. Of course we don't care if folk die by police brutality and state power, because celebrating state power is at the center of what a lot of Christianity is.
You just took us to church. Praise God.
About to say the exact same.
Yes.
Well, to be clear, I think Jamie, all of y'all brought us to church, but like that was like, you know, the stand up. And so at the risk of elevating that patriarchy that we love and that voice that was so amazing, I want to bring us all in and share. And if you have questions out there, also push back, push forward, lift up. I do want to say that, wow, you know, yes, you know, as a person, you know, as an out positive person and positive in attitude and lab result, this is where I find my joy. In both ministry and queerness and calling and social work and incarceration and prayer books and recovery, both 12-step and 2-step. This is where we are liberated. And so it has just been such a joy to be here and to call those things into existence that are not as though they were, if you will, as I stumble over that verse, showing that I haven't read my Bible, I haven't got up on my memory verses the way I should have. So yes, I'm not going to beg for questions, but I do want to, let me see, welcome folks into asking any of them. I know that there were some technological issues, looked like they got straightened out. Someone is joining us from the Philippines, where HIV is increasingly rapid because a lot of people are not aware of it because of our major religion is Roman Catholic and don't like the usage of contraceptives. Sex education is not a part of the curriculum here in the Philippines. Thank you so much for sharing that and uplifting that. you're speaking for a lot of places, not just in the Philippines, far away, but also very near here in the States, where, you know, contraception and sexuality are not at all talked about. And as the Reverend Fresh are reminding us, exacerbating the problem, causing more harm than good. So thank you for that. Any other questions? Anyone? And you can also question one another here on this, in this space together. Feel free to clap back, Jay Mace or Aaron or M, to our amazing respondents.
I just had a quick reflection, just because as I was hearing, because I think there was that really important point about, you know, when you were talking, Reverend Francois, is that his?
Yes.
Your name? When you were talking specifically about the trans sister who, you know, was this actually the right place for her? And just like, I think that's a question that a lot of people need to wrestle with, is that, to me, I get a lot of different inboxes or emails or reach outs from congregations or like, how do I get more Black trans folks here? Or how do I get more folks here? How do I get XYZ? It's like, is your space the space that we would want to show up? Because it's not even just enough that, and so I typed something in the chat box just about, you know, this idea of safety, because like safety is actually just like the minimum bar, right? That like, can I be safe, but can I enjoy myself? Can I feel like I will be able to make friends and community? Is it worthwhile to me? Will I learn things in the same way that people will learn things from me? And I think that a lot of congregations have never asked themselves that. They just want to seem friendly, or they want to seem nice, or they want to stay like, I know it's the right thing to support folks. And to them, usually the right thing is to be usurped up into the same system versus like, actually, how can I support people? So to me, I want like everyone who's listening, especially affiliated with congregations, to not ask the default of like, how do I get more of folks who are trans into my congregation, but how do I support trans folks where they are? Because we do have trauma that is rational, right? That is irrational. And if we go into your space, we might get more trauma, right? And so the reality is like, us exiting those spaces does not mean that the religious spaces are still not responsible for the things that we're experiencing. They're very responsible for the things that we're experiencing, and we're responsible for the trauma. So how can you still financially show up for? How can you housing-wise shows up for? How can you show up for our emotional well-being, the political strife that is, you know, thrust upon us without us being a part of your congregations? You know, there's so many different ways that we ask for help that is not listened to or thought about, because we have decided, because we care about ourselves enough to not put ourselves again in harm's way within many different faith institutions.
I think that's a beautiful way.
You.
I'm sorry.
Go,
I think that's a beautiful way,
just...
Jay, to like hold those who ask those questions accountable. That is a fantastic way, because one, it doesn't, those questions place the work on you, when in essence it should place the work on them, right? I'm writing down all the things that are said, because it's a whole bunch of constituents that should be able to do the work, but also know that being an inclusive space doesn't necessarily mean you get membership. Like that's not the quid pro quo, so to speak. But it is about doing the work, and it is still about loving on people, and it's about loving on humans. And so thank you for that.
Thank you for that. And I like to say, are you willing to hand over the keys? You can welcome me to welcome me into your house is one thing, but are you willing to hand over the keys and leave for a little while? You know, and that is the kind of object subject kind of you know, ethic that I'm hoping to move congregations away from. Even as I'm responsible for supporting welcoming congregations within Unitarian Universalism, like, you know, are you willing to hand over the deed, you know, to the property? That is the kind of, you know, radical inclusion that we're talking about. Welcome, you know, is like, you know, you can come and have a seat. Can I get you some water? You know, like, are you vegan? Are you that's basic manners. But when we're talking about radical transformation and saving lives, you know, where's the deed at? Where is the endowment at? Where is the ownership and who owns what, how public is it, how public private is it. It's classified as a 501c3, like, but is it really? Or do we have stakeholders here that are, you know, in essence holding the line, if you will? And so these are deep questions. Any other
Yeah,
comments?
I want to say, I came out to my family when I was, I want to say 12, 13 years old. And the response that I received was, we know. When I transitioned, it was a different response. It was like some of my family members said, why can't you just be gay? One of my siblings said, I've worried about you as a gay person, and I feel more worried as, now that you're transitioning. And my mom has walked with me and has transitioned with me through all of my life's experiences. She walked through, she's been there for her child, and now I can be there for her in ways that she has been there for me throughout my life. My mom took me to the emergency room when I was having an asthma attack. My mom was there when, I dressed up for the first time. My mom helped me. And, it would be wonderful if churches and communities, religious communities, could loan a hand in that way, and it's a struggle. And my mom still calls me Michael, and I have to be okay with that, because my mom is transitioning into having a trans child, just like she transitioned, and my family, they transitioned into having a gay sibling and a gay child. Now they're transitioning in having a trans sibling and a trans child. And I'm really speaking to the trans community that, we, as patient as we are with our transitions or not, we have to have that respect and patience for, our community, our parents, our siblings, ourselves. It's really important. And my spirituality today went from 10 to a 50, and as I live and breathe, I have faith, that I'm going to be cared for and loved. And that faith comes from my recovery, the people that I walk this journey of life with, through our circumstances, through the cause and effects of our choices. And this is the gift for me, and trust me, my namesake, who I was named after, is my cousin Michael, who was the first person who died of AIDS. And I was 23 years old. And my dear, I feel blessed to be named after my cousin. And because he stood close to his faith to his last breath. And that I carry and embrace with me for the rest of my life. So it's very, the struggle, the dance with faith and religion is a long dance, and when it ends,
Thank you,
I will end in peace,
We'll leave it to our M, who, if you know M, and some of y'all listening out there do, know that it is most appropriate to be left grounded and with the word that we need, even amongst scholars and theologians and the called, to be left well with the one who's called to live and to lead us. And so thank you for those of you who have been listening on our conversation. eavesdropping, if you will. It has been such a joy to have all of these voices, friends, new and old, gathered in one space, and to have this important conversation that hopefully will not end with the closing of this Zoom room. I do see a question where someone asked, is there a list of churches that do not cause trauma to LGBTQ community? And resources were left in the chat, which I will name as info at, www.welcomingresources.org. That's www.welcomingresources.org. Where you can begin there. You can also reach out to us directly via email to hivfaithcoalition@gmail.com. Feel free to like us on Facebook at US Faith. Follow us on Twitter at US Faith, and subscribe to our YouTube channel at US Faith. I also want to end as we began, by naming the trauma that many of us are living, not just today, not just this week, but all the time, but particularly this week as we see our lives on trial in the body, broken and bruised, of George Floyd. And again, since we are faith folk, the crucifixion, if you will, of Dante Wright in the streets and on public. And I just really thank you all for showing up here amidst that trauma. Jay Mace, Ian Hill, Aaron Sabrut, Shyla, M. Shane, and the Reverend Dr. Willie Francois. Y'all better get back to the Black church. Because it's preaching today. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for all behind the scenes, Michael Schoenmeyer, Kamel, Carrie, you know who you are, Ulysses. Thank you all so much for making this happen. Have a wonderful afternoon.